So, you want to play a spellcaster, but you don't know which one. Or maybe you like spellcasters, but you really want to get into the weeds of the details. What is going to make them different from each other? What is going to make each one pop and shine? I got you. Hello folks, Phil Gallagher aka Thraben you here for another Pathfinder Second Edition video. And this video is really a sequel to one that I have already made. I made a video called The Hidden Weaknesses of Classes, where I talked about the strengths and weaknesses of some of the classes in Pathfinder Second Edition. But in that video, I said, we're going to skip the spellcasters for today, because, well, a lot of their weaknesses come from their spell lists. And the people wanted more. The people wanted to see the casters. And so, this video is for you all. Secret strengths of spellcasters. We got that alliteration going on. Before we get started here, I am making a big push on this channel in April, May, and June. Videos coming every Friday. At the end of June, I am going to reevaluate how much effort I am putting into this channel. So if you like what you see today, hit the subscribe button. That is the easiest way to support me for free. And thank you to the handful of people who have thrown a little bit of money my way, such as my first YouTube members, Raphael, Daniel, Coy, Merlanin, Joona, and Max Magnus 20019. If you have a sweet idea for a Pathfinder video, feel free to reach out as well. I am taking donations for video topics. With that being said, that's enough self-plugging. Let's get into the content. I don't want to like, comment, and subscribe, pew, 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 all day. So my goal for today is to first talk about general caster traits, because there's going to be some words like spontaneous and prepared that I'm going to be throwing around a lot in this video. I'm going to make sure that everybody is on the same page with what those means. And then we're going to go into some of the strengths, weaknesses, and features of the various full spellcaster classes. And I am looking to give you the information that you need to maybe select which caster you want to play, and potentially help you build around some problems that might come up with your classes. I'm going to try to limit myself to a slide for every class, which is not a lot of space, so we're going to be brief. Feel free to get into the comments if you've got some follow-up questions, though. And above all else, I want to make sure that you understand that it is not my goal today to criticize class design. This is educational in tone. I like just about every Pathfinder 2E class. Although, there's one today that I maybe like a lot less, and I'm pretty critical of. Let's start by taking a look at the spell lists. And this is a bit of an oversimplification. Every list has quite a bit of nuance, but if we're trying to boil it down to just a couple of bullet points, the arcane list is your blasting list. It is damage focused, and you have the ability to target all defenses. And what I mean by that is you can target fortitude, reflex, and will saves, as well as AC, and you also get some other spells that maybe are good at ignoring defenses completely and forcing through damage in spots where things are really tough, with Force Barrage being kind of the key example of that. Whereas your Divine list is going to be support focused, with a huge emphasis on healing and buffing. And my other favorite thing about the Divine list is it is very good at anti-creature type options. If you know you are fighting fiends, devils, aberrations, undead, there's a very good chance that you can find a spell that is perfect for fighting that exact creature type, and all of a sudden you can become an exceptional blaster. Sometimes those spells will literally do double the damage of a normal spell slot of that rank, because it is so narrow. Sometimes these things will also be alignment based, so they might be particularly good versus evil creatures or something like that. Your occult list is more of a support list. Lots of mental stuff going on. Think buffs and debuffs and illusions. There is still some healing on this list, meaning that you can play a great support role. Note that the primary healing spell on the occult list is Soothe, which is less in terms of raw healing than the heal spell itself. Soothe is still a great spell and has use cases and can be the primary healing spell for your party, so don't sweat that, But if you want to be a healer, maybe don't look to the occult list. And finally is the primal list. This is, in my opinion, the most balanced spell list. It is just very solid with good options. You get the heal spell while also getting many of the most iconic damaging spells. There are plenty of videos out there kind of going into more details about these various spell lists and what they're good at and bad at. And if you find you really like spellcasters, please check out Mathfinder's channel. He does excellent work going into the nitty-gritty details of all the spellcaster stuff you could possibly need. And as far as the weaknesses go, the Arcane's big one is that like you just don't get heal. You don't get soothe. You don't get to heal while also doing all of the best damage. That would be ridiculous. And while the Arcane list does have some support stuff, you're probably going to find fewer buff spells on this list. If you look at the raw size of this list, there are 719 different Arcane spells versus 399 Divine and mid-500s of Primal and Occult spells. So the Arcane list is big, and that gives you a lot of flexibility to hit all of these different saves and defenses. You are often going to find the Divine list isn't really the best at just blasting. Again, unless it's a specific creature type, and you have fewer spells to physically look at. I often find the Divine spells that I am looking at tend to skew towards being Fortitude saves as well, so as a Divine caster, you might not be targeting all of the saves particularly well. Similarly, when playing an Occult caster, I often struggle with good reflex options. At lower levels, you might find yourself heightening a lower level spell rather than having a nice reflex targeting spell that you can just cast at your highest spell slot level. It smooths out a little bit later on, but there is this time where if you're looking for reflex saves options, heightening is the answer. This list is also slanted towards mental effects, meaning if you run into things that are immune to mental effects or resistant to mental damage, you might have some trouble. And since so many of your things are illusions or mental damage, you might not have the same degree of attacking different weaknesses that some of your other casting classes might. And as far as the primal list goes, it's a really solid list. So the big weakness here is that you are probably not targeting will saves very well. You've got healing, you've got blasting, you can cover a bunch of damage types, you've got your lightning bolts, you've got your fireballs, but maybe not your phantasmal killers. It's called Vision of Death now. My bad. Now, I want to be fair to the Divine list real quick. Let's look back at these numbers real quick. So the Divine list has 399 spells on it. But the thing about Divine casters is that they usually get access to spells from other lists to round out their characters. Maybe your god gives you some spells. Maybe you have divine access. Maybe you are an animist and your apparitions give you extra spells. So something to keep in mind here is that some of the weaknesses of playing a divine caster might already be built in to your character if you are looking to address that weakness. You also might be able to pick up focus spells that cover a save that you normally don't cover. Beyond that, you might want to be thinking about your key ability score when you are thinking about spellcasters, because they play into other things your character might do. You are a cleric and you are wisdom based. Well, maybe you are your in or out of combat healer because you have battle medicine and treat wounds all trained up and ready to go. Whereas if you are a charisma oriented class like a sorcerer, maybe you are demoralizing before you cast your big spell, so your enemy has a better chance of failing their saving throw. And if you are an intelligence focused class, well, maybe you are really, really good at recall knowledge, and so maybe you want to pick up some lores so that you can get even better at that. In selecting your spellcaster, you might have a choice between prepared or a spontaneous caster. We're going to oversimplify this into 2 bullet points. Your prepared casters are going to pick specific spells for every single spell slot that they have. So If you have 2 first level spell slots, maybe you are taking 1 Force Barrage and 1 Fear. Whereas if you are a spontaneous caster, you have a number of spell slots that you are going to use on your range of spells. So maybe you are a class that has access to Bless and Heal. And let's say you know one other divine first rank spell. Maybe you have 2 spell slots that you can use to cast any of those spells twice. So that could be 2 heals, that could be a bless and a heal, that could be 2 blesses, so you have a little bit more flexibility. For those of you coming from 5e, you will probably find spontaneous casters easier to play at first and more intuitive, but prepared casters can end up being very, very powerful. Again, go see Pathfinder if you want some details on this. We're just doing the 2 bullet point version for now. So these are the classes that we're going to cover today. And in terms of timestamps down below, I'm going to break them into 3 sections. So we'll do 3, then 4 to round it out. And we're going to throw the Necromancer playtest into this because I think that class is complete enough as is, where it is unlikely to change much by the time of full release. Note that if you are looking for the half casters, like the Magus or maybe the Summoner, those have already been covered in my Hidden Weaknesses of Classes video, so check that out if you want to see my thoughts on those. First up, we're going to start with what is probably my favorite class in the whole game, the Animist. This is a Wisdom caster that uses divine spells, but is also going to get some apparition spells as well that expand the divine list. As far as classes go, the Animist gets so much from its class. You can have medium armor proficiency without jumping through any hoops. You can have 2 focus points at level 1 without jumping through any hoops. You get a ton of apparitions that you can change daily, so you get exceptional flexibility. And the 11 different focus spells that you have access to at level 1 are pretty much all good. As you start leveling up, you have good class feats, which is not going to be a consistent trend for spellcasters. Many times, spellcasters get their strength from their spell list rather than from their class feats. And so, while some other people might be looking at reach spell and widen spell, you're getting things like, hey, I have an exceptional feat called Medium's Awareness that is going to give me an initiative buff that stacks with incredible initiative because one of them is circumstance and one of them is status. I have been very, very impressed by this class as a whole. But if we are talking about the weaknesses of this class, boy howdy, it is complex. I have an Animist spreadsheet that I regularly use when playing an Animist. There is a lot there. There is a very, very high skill ceiling for this class. In good news, even if you were hypothetically to just pick a couple of apparitions and mostly stick with those, your character will still probably be strong. That's how good the class chassis is for this class. Next up is the Bard, a charisma-based class that is an occult caster, and this is probably your best support caster class. The Bard gets a handful of single-action support cantrips that often will hit your entire party at once, or maybe your entire enemy fleet or whatever you're fighting at once. I've got Courageous Anthem up here as an example, which is an excellent 60-foot emanation, powering up the attack rolls of you and all of your allies with a +1 bonus to attack rolls, damage rolls, and save against fear effects. This is great, and that is a single action. That is great as a level 1 class feature. When you are thinking about your spellcasters, what to do with the third action is a common problem, because most spells are going to be 2 actions. So if your class has something that is a single action baked into it, your class is probably going to feel very good. For example, many of the Animist focus spells offer something like healing or decent damage as a 1-action activity. Class is great. I do have a, complaint about the Bard. The Lingering Composition feat is so powerful that it basically feels mandatory for your character. But every single type of bard does not necessarily get it. When you build a bard, you select a muse, and the Maestro muse gets access to Lingering Composition immediately at level 1. There is a feat called Multifarious Muse that can allow you to pick up focus spells from other muses. This is the closest thing the bard has to an obligatory class tax, which is not something that I like. I like being able to build Pathfinder characters with like very specific visions in mind. But if you take a look at the bottom of the screen here, oh, sorry, I put a different thing up. I am a liar, JK. So Lingering Composition basically allows you to have your Courageous Anthem or whatever composition cantrip you are casting last for longer. So you don't have to use your third action every single round to do it. And this is really important because you are going to need to move sometimes. Maybe you are going to activate your Wand of Shardstorm to be sending out force barrages at bosses. You will have other actions that you want to do. You're a Charisma class. Maybe you want to demoralize sometimes. And Lingering Composition is really, really important to round out your character. Pretty much every bard should have that. In one of the bard guides somewhere, someone wrote something like, a bard with Multifarious Muse is just a better bard, and that stuck with me. If you remember where I read that, throw that in the comments. I would appreciate that. Now, as far as your class feats go, I would say your class feats are fine. But there is very much a focus on the composition cantrips. So you are unlikely to get much from your class feats other than things that impact your composition cantrips or give you more focus points by teaching you new focus spells. So for example, at the bottom, I have Fortissimo Composition, which can really make numbers swing in a massive way. So what if for a turn, instead of your Courageous Anthem providing a +1 status bonus to attack rolls, it provided a +3 bonus to attack rolls? That's kind of a big deal in a 60-foot emanation, so that is probably the entire battle map or very, very close to it. Something to keep in mind when you are thinking about the bard as a character is that your personal damage output might be low. And I've put little asterisks around personal. If you are buffing your allies, that extra damage that they get because of you is really your damage. So if you are looking at your occult spell list and you're like, oh, I wish my numbers were bigger. Why am I not hitting as hard as the fighter? Why am I not blasting as hard as the sorcerer? It's because you're turning hits into crits, or you're turning misses into hits on other characters. Every +1 matters in this game, and sometimes you're going to be giving out +3s to everybody at the same time. So don't get disappointed by your damage numbers. You're doing a lot as a bard. And final thing that all your bards should be looking into is things called codas. A coda is sort of like a musical staff. You can use it to perform, but you can also have spells stored in it, just like you can a staff. And there are a bunch of really cool ones. I think the one I used on my bard was the Drums of War, and it was Chef's Kiss levels of good. Next up, we are going to talk about the Cleric, and specifically today we are going to talk about the Cloistered Cleric. The War Priest has been covered in the other video. This is going to be a Wisdom caster with divine spells, although they're going to pick up a few other spells from whichever deity you end up choosing. The big draw to being a cleric is 4 slots for some mixture of heal or harm, depending on how you want to approach your character. Although, let's be real, it's usually just 4 max level heals, and it feels great. The Cloistered Cleric gets a focus spell at level 1 because you get the Domain Initiate for free. And as you level up, you can get more focus points and more focus spells to keep spamming that. And once you have 3 focus points, you can last so long on an adventuring day before you run out of resources. Like, you might have 3 offensive focus spells that you can use, and all of your max rank heals, and then you still have normal spell slots as well. Like, you're good for a long, tough day. Cleric feats, generally speaking, are very good. However, as a Cloistered Cleric specifically, a huge number of the cleric feats aren't going to be relevant to you or would be stronger on a war priest. So even though the cleric feats are very good, a lot of them aren't good for you. So you are probably going to be getting new focus spells and focus points out of your cleric class feats, and then picking up a couple of other things here and there. Maybe you'll pick up some healing hands, so all of your max level heals are a little bit better, although there is some math to be done there in making that decision. I have a video about healing that goes into that a little bit more. And in talking about focus spells, I think it is important to think about the character you are in selecting your focus spells. The War Priest Cleric is in love with things like the Destruction Domain's focus spell, Cry of Destruction, which is a 15-foot cone fortitude save that can do d12 worth of damage. Like, that's awesome for them. You, little squishy cloth caster that you are, might not love that. The Sun Domain has an awesome focus spell that's also a 15-foot cone that can blind and dazzle, and you, squishy little thing that you are, would really prefer to stay 25 or 30 feet away from most of your enemies. So as you are building your character, really, really, really pay attention to your deity when you are making your initial character choices. It matters a lot. What domains you have access to matter. The advanced domain spell that you pick up at I think level 6, it's either level 6 or level 8, can vary wildly depending on what domains you have access to. And cleric number 1 might be saying, I got Fireball. Cleric number 2 might be saying, I got Wall of Stone. And if you're like, oh, I got some illusion spell that I'm never going to cast, you might be a little bit sad. And I'm going to take this opportunity to talk about attack roll focus spells. This is something that applies to a bunch of characters, but it came up in this section first. So here we go. Your attack roll spells are going to be significantly less accurate than the attack rolls of your fighter or your barbarian. They are going to get striking runes that improve their accuracy, and them hitting is a larger portion of their character, whereas attack rolls are just one thing that you can do. Again, casters can target multiple defenses. So, if you are just rolling your attack roll spell with 0 setup, you are probably going to be incredibly disappointed by attack roll focus spells. They are going to look like they are really good on paper, and then you are just going to feel them missing all of the time. Whereas when someone starts demoralizing the enemy, or giving you the aid action to make your spell more accurate, all of a sudden those spells start looking much better. So I tend to shy away from attack roll focus spells personally. I like the consistency of saving throws. But if your party likes teamwork, these attack roll focus spells become quite powerful. When the chips are down, I prefer to play a War Priest Cleric over a Cloistered Cleric, but I have played a couple of Cloistered Clerics, and I've had friends who have played them as well, and they still end up being perfectly fine characters. Okay, next we've got the Druid. This is a wisdom-based class using the primal spell list. And full disclosure up front, I do not like the Druid. I think this class is relatively weak as a whole, and I would rather play other primal casters. So I'm just going to let my bias out in front of this section. And the reason why I don't like the Druid is that I think the class offers you very little. I think so much of the power of this class is just from the primal spell list being generically good. So, for example, you get Shield Block as a thing you get at level 1, which is kind of cool. You know, it can help make your caster less squishy, but I don't really want to be in range of the enemies most of the time. And if you are trying to stay 30 feet away from the enemy, then you're never actually using the Shield Block class feature that you are getting. And so it's kind of wasted space for the way that many people are going to play Druids. I also think that many of the other level 1 class features that you get are really GM dependent for how useful they are going to be. You get this wild song language that could let you communicate with other Druids if they're in your campaign, and you can gain the ability to speak to plants and animals. which again is going to be kind of GM dependent of how much they are actually going to give you, how frequently animals are realistically going to be around, that sort of stuff. And beyond that, I don't really like the Druid feats either. I think their class feats are weak as a whole, and you might want to use your class feats for archetypes even if you aren't in a free archetype game. Now, there are some feat lines you can go down that are pretty reasonable. There is an animal companion feat line, for example. But generally speaking, most of the time when I've drawn up druids, I've been like, this focus spell is cool. What can we do with this character? And then I've abandoned the idea shortly thereafter. The other thing I don't like about druids is that it's very awkward to get extra focus points. For many of the orders, getting an extra focus point involves taking the Order Explorer spell so that you gain access to the abilities and feats associated with a different order, and then taking a follow-up feat beyond that to get a focus point. So whereas many classes can just take a feat to get a focus point, that is not something that you just get to do immediately. So if you like your really cool focus spell from your order, like, too bad. It's going to be a little while until you get another focus point. So, Druid defenders, get in the comments. Tell me why I am wrong. Tell me why you think this class is reasonable. Just evaluating this one in terms of the numbers and trying to have an objective a standpoint. I don't see it on this one. And when I compare this druid to the druid of like D&D 5e, I felt the D&D 5e druid was just monstrous, and I don't feel that way about the Pathfinder druid. But being able to heal and fireball with your spell slots is sick. So I get liking the primal spell list, and I love the primal spell list. The druid for a long time was kind of the iconic primal caster, but now we've got more options. Now, let's talk about the Necromancer. I love this class. It is int-based, it is an occult caster, and as of the time of recording, it is in the playtest phase. The Necromancer slaps. It gets a lot from its class, and there is a trade-off here, though, because you get fewer spell slots than most other casters. 3 is kind of the default number, with some classes going above that when they get less from their class features. The Necromancer is probably the focus spell class, or at least focus spell caster. That niche was previously occupied by the Psychic, and now their throne is being contested by the Necromancer. You have incredibly good defensive and offensive focus spells, which is something not all of the classes can say. You can be throwing out a muscle barrier to give, I believe it is 10 hit points per spell rank of temporary HP. That is crazy. My Necromancer that I'm currently playing gets to hand out 60 HP up to 4 times per battle. It's wild. And you have really good offensive options as well, covering multiple different types of defenses. You can also get a 4th focus point if you really, really need it in a pinch by using the Consume Thrall action, which is something that I have done a couple of times at higher level combats, but was something that I didn't often need in lower level combats. Casters often use their spell slots to get reactions, and the Necromancer just has a couple of class feats that can give pretty respectable reactions, doing either a little bit of damage in a pseudo attack of opportunity, or providing some, I believe it is resistant to damage if you are next to a thrall when something hits you. Now, the big Necromancer weakness, though, is that, boy, is your action economy taxed. If you need to move in a turn, you are missing something very, very real that you could be doing with your Necromancer abilities. Create Thrall is something that you want to cast just about every single turn of the combat, and you want to be doing a 2-action spell most turn of the combats as well. Since you have such good focus spells and usually 3 focus points, you have a lot of resources there. So every time you have to move, you're missing out on something real. So big battle maps, massive problem for the Necromancer. Every time my GM, busts out a battle map and there's like 100 feet in any given direction, I'm just like, oh man, I'm in trouble. And when you have enemies casting your fireballs, your lightning bolts, your chain lightnings, that sort of stuff that is just going to rip through things on the field, your thralls are going to die. And when your thralls die, sometimes you can't use the focus spell that you wanted. Sometimes you can't use your Reach of the Dead to get some extra range or something like that. And it can be a big deal. Necromancer is a very solid base for a class, but your action economy is really rough, at least in the playtest stage. Despite that, I still love this class. All right, now we've got the Oracle. This is a charisma-based divine caster that is also going to get some number of granted spells. The thing that makes the Oracle unique is that they are drawing from 3 resources instead of 2. Let's call them resource pools instead of 2. So most casters have their spell slots and their focus spells. Well, the Oracles get a third thing. They also are allowed to do a certain number of curse-bound actions per combat. And these tend to be pretty good effects, often similar in power level to a focus spell. More so in terms of utility than damage in most cases, though. I have really enjoyed playing Oracles. I played one pre-remaster, and I have done quite a few sessions with Korakai, the iconic Oracle that they use for pre-gens in Pathfinder Society. Enjoyed playing that character a lot. In, let's call it normal play for a second. In normal play, where you are going and refreshing your resources between encounters, I think the Oracle does incredibly well, and you might end a session, even a multi-hour, multi-combat session, with plenty of resources left. When you play an Oracle, and you have back-to-back encounters, though, and you don't get to refocus, it's a really big deal, because when you refocus, you also lower your curse-bound level, allowing you to use your curse-bound actions again. So when you don't get to refocus, it's like double bad. So if you are in a really tense campaign and your GM is like, all right, you open the door and you fight the enemies and you think the last enemy is dead, and then your GM is like, and the enemies in the next room heard you and opened the door and you're still in an initiative, that's a very scary campaign to be playing an Oracle in. You are going to have good feat options as an Oracle. Almost all of your feats are going to be directed at either gaining you another focus spell or another focus point, or gaining you a curse-bound action. So maybe don't overload on either category, and have a decent mix of what you intend to do with your focus spells and your curse-bound actions. I will say that the Oracle sometimes runs into some action economy issues where you wish you could do 2 things in a turn, but you have 2 different 2-action things that you want to be doing. I don't know that it's enough to say this is a problem of the class or anything like that, but it's something I noticed quite a bit in my own play, where it's like, oh man, I really wish one of these was a 1-action thing. Luckily, as a charisma-oriented class, if you have nothing else to do, demoralizing an enemy is a pretty great use of actions. Although on that note, when you get into long fights, sometimes you might run out of single action options because you have blown through your curse-bound actions or your focus spells, or you are out of targets to demoralize. Overall, though, I really like this class, and I think the remaster helped with it quite a bit. Next up is the Psychic, and this is the first of the classes that have a little bit more variety in what the class is going to look like depending on your choices at character creation. So you are going to have a conscious mind and an unconscious mind that impact your stats and what focus spells and what amped cantrips you are going to have access to. So you could be an intelligence or a charisma-based class, and that's a pretty big boon because that gives you massive character customization options. Like if you want to be able to demoralize on your character, you can go charisma. If you want to be able to take a certain dedication, you're like, oh man, I really need intelligence for this. Like you've got that covered too. And you're going to be an occult class, but you're going to get a few granted spells that allow you to branch out. This is a class that is high complexity at character creation. When I first read the Psychic, I literally got a headache. Like I was just trying to piece all of the things together and try to figure out all of the options. I think the initial reading of this class is just like, oh, this is too much. Then once the character is built, I think it is very straightforward in play and quite good. So don't get discouraged if you look at the Psychic and you just feel terribly about it after your first read through. The big draw to the Psychic is that you have these awesome amped cantrips that you can use, and an action called Unleash Psyche that you can use to kind of go Super Saiyan for a little while. You will gain access to some bonus abilities, such as the ability to heal for a single action, and your spells will do more damage. But it creates some interesting risk and reward situations. If you take a look down here at the bottom of this screen, after you've unleashed your Psyche and it runs out, you can't unleash it again for 2 rounds, and you're stupefied 1 for 2 rounds. Meaning that every time you cast a spell, you have to succeed at a flat check or it might fail. And for a Psychic who wants to be casting spells, this is scary. This is a very real risk. And for that reason, normally I don't say, hey Spellcaster, you should have a weapon in your hand. But for the Psychic, that is something that you should seriously consider. Or maybe you need some activated items or some consumables that you are going to use on those off turns. Sometimes things will be scary enough that you're just like, I need to risk it. I need to do some damage here. I need to cast a spell. But let me tell you, I've been playing a lot of Psychics recently, on Dawnsbury days specifically. And sometimes when your stupefied ends up making you fail a spell, it's rough. It feels bad. And the Psychic can be really good at support for a class that is often sort of touted as something that is going to be a blaster caster. The Psychics can do a lot of damage, and it's very easy to do a lot of damage while playing Psychics. Some of their amped cantrips are really, really strong offensively, or have absurd range. But here's one of the support cantrips that you might have. Glimpse Weakness. So, the first ally that hits a target after you cast this with a successful strike adds additional precision damage equal to 1 plus this spell's level, and then it ends. But the amped version, which you're probably going to be doing, is 1d4 plus 1, and every 2 levels that scales up by another 1d4 plus 1. So, this is a cantrip, meaning that you can do it multiple times per turn for free. So imagine there are 3 enemies on the field and you've got a party full of marshals who love hitting things. You're just like, glimpse weakness you, glimpse weakness you, glimpse weakness you, and then your marshals go to town and they feel their hits getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And since this is a single action cantrip, well, if you spam that when you've unleashed your Psyche, after you've released your Psyche and you're stupefied, if one of those fails, not that big of a deal. If 2 of them fails, okay, that was kind of a bad turn. All 3 of them fails, don't buy a lottery ticket. It was not your day. A quick note here about duplicate effects. It is my reading of Glimpse Weakness that you are not allowed to Glimpse Weakness the same enemy multiple times to just stack up Glimpse Weakness and make it so that effectively you have kind of infinite force barrages, right? 1d4 plus 1 as the baseline damage there. If you were able to just Glimpse Weakness the same enemy, just on the boss, glimpse, glimpse, glimpse every single turn, maybe without even amping it, that's kind of a lot. If you're interested in this, I believe it is the duplicate tag or the duplicate text that talks about how if you apply something multiple times, only the highest one of them applies. So I give the Psychic 2 thumbs up. I really, really like this class. I often find myself wanting to archetype into a Psychic to pick up one of their really cool amped cantrips. Next up is the Sorcerer, a charisma-based class that can be played with any spell tradition. It's a little hard to talk about the strengths and weaknesses of a Sorcerer when your Sorcerers look so different from each other, because they can be from all 4 spell traditions. I personally don't tend to play occult sorcerers. I have messed around with the other traditions. I just like some of the other occult casters more than I like occult sorcerers personally, but they're all fine. A sorcerer gets a ton of spell slots and something called Sorcerer's Potency, which means that if you are dealing damage with a leveled spell or healing with a leveled spell, you get a bonus to that healing or damage. It's kind of the biggest draw of the actual class features beyond the spell lists here. One of the things I dislike about the Sorcerer is that I think so much of the Sorcerer's flavor comes from the blood magic effects, and there are a ton of feats that lean into those blood magic effects. But I often find that the benefits of blood magic are kind of forgettable or negligible or don't apply in a lot of scenarios. That's not to say that they're necessarily bad, because they will do things like raise your AC by 1 or increase your saving throws or something of that general power level. But a lot of times I find that I don't use my blood magic benefit on the turn where it actually happens. So I think in terms of a mindset, if you are building a sorcerer, you should think this blood magic is a cool thing that is going to happen and is going to be relevant sometimes, and you'll be happy when it happens, rather than I need to make my blood magic work every single turn. That's my opinion there as far as sorcerer stuff goes. Bonus spell slots, great. Sorcerer's potency, great. Focus spells, also great. If you are looking to deal a lot of damage, there are some really good single action blasting options available to sorcerers. I do not necessarily think that all of the bloodlines are created equal in terms of how much they give your character. Look into some of the written sorcerer guides or something like that if you're really curious about some of the nitty-gritty details of like, okay, which one of these are actually the most powerful. That's kind of beyond the scope of this video if we're trying to keep it brief. Generally speaking, I think the Sorcerer is getting a decent amount from its class features, and so it has generally weak class feats. There's one that I am very fascinated with. I really like the idea of split shot. I really like the idea of turning attack roll spells, which kind of by their nature often miss just due to how the math works. Being able to do an attack roll spell versus 2 different creatures is kind of cool to me. And I have not played a high level sorcerer, but the idea of getting to take some high level attack roll spell and throw it at 2 different targets is very, very appealing to me. I like that idea of spell shape meta magic effects. But most of my sorcerer experience is at levels 1 to 4. Some other time. Next up is a newer class, the Witch. This is int-based, and like the Sorcerer, you could be of any spell tradition. If you're trying to think about like what is going to be the difference between the Sorcerer and the Witch is the familiar caster. You know, a wizard might be able to get a familiar, and their familiar might be fine, but the wizard's patron grants your familiar some really, really strong abilities. So for example, at the bottom of the screen here, I have the broken one, the resentment patron's familiar of ongoing misery. Whenever you cast or sustain a hex, a special type of spell that witches know, your familiar can curse a creature within 15 feet of it, prolonging the duration of any negative conditions affecting it by 1 round. So, those really nasty things your occult caster is casting, you just keep it going, and going, and going, and going. It's very good. It's very, very, very strong. And so the familiar abilities that your patron bestows upon your familiar are going to be stronger than the things that a normal familiar gets. Although the witch has a line of familiar enhancing abilities that make their familiars particularly strong. Now, in my current campaign, my girlfriend is playing a witch, and the biggest thing that I have noticed is that the range of the familiar abilities is very small. 15 feet is kind of tiny in the grand scheme of a battle map. So if you are trying to keep your fun little cat familiar or whatever it is that you have alive and within 15 feet of the enemies so that you can keep doing this thing, there is some tension there, especially if you need to use your actions to command your familiar. The independent familiar ability is very good at giving your familiar a free action each turn to move around the battle map as it needs to do. And you have Patron's Puppet, and you potentially have the Patron's Puppet Hex spell as well that can help out with that. But there have been a lot of times where that familiar has just been like 1 or 2 squares away from where we needed it to be. This is particularly relevant for the... I don't have the names of these memorized. Faith's Flamekeeper? Got it. The Faith's Flamekeeper familiar, where you can give out temp HPs to your ally, but again, it is a short range thing. So you might move your familiar to the right spot, and then your allies might, go around and get flanking or something like that, and make it so that they're in the wrong spot for your familiar abilities. I have found that the Witch struggles a little bit in big battle maps, sort of like how the Necromancer had problems with their thralls being in the wrong spot. The Witch might have a similar problem where the Witch's movement outpaces the movement of the familiar, especially if the Witch needs to do some bonus actions or the Witch needs to stride twice to get across the map. It's something to be aware of. I have not had much of a problem with the familiar dying in combat. That was something that I thought was going to be a bigger deal than it actually was. The familiar has died a couple times over the course of the campaign that we're currently playing, but the enemies have not tended to target the familiar. Resentment Witch, your mileage may vary on that one, though. I think the witches have excellent class feats. The Cackle class feat that allows you to sustain spells for free is something that I often see people archetyping into Witch to get. It can really free up your action economy to do some broken combos, especially if you want to be sustaining multiple spells at the same time for some reason. And even if you're not going down the familiar line, you might find things like the Cauldron line of feats allowing you to make potions, or the Ceremonial Knife feats kind of allowing you to make bonus wands as being pretty good. Big thumbs up to Witch. I like this class a lot. And the final class for today is the Witch, an intelligence-based arcane caster. Now, at character creation, you are going to have 2 choices. You are going to be selecting your arcane school, which is going to determine what focus spells you get and what school spells you are going to get. And you'll be getting a bonus spell slot for each one of your levels that you can only put one of your school spells into. These schools are going to be things like battle magic, where you're very good at attacking with your spell slots, although you have very different schools. For those of you that like to homebrew, which is something that I am not normally a big fan of in Pathfinder Second Edition, I think the game does an excellent job of giving you most of what you need. But for those of you that like to homebrew, I think it is very, very easy to homebrew your own school of spells here, where you're like, oh, I really feel like my wizard is doing these things with their tradition. I think that's very easy to do without breaking the game. And then you are going to select an arcane thesis as well, which offers you some degree of specialization versus other wizards. So for example, your wizard might be really good at casting max rank spell slots, or your wizard might be really, really good at using a staff. Beyond their abundance of spell slots, they also get something called Drain Bonded Item, which can allow them to recover a spell slot in a pinch. So if you used a critical spell and you really need to cast it again, you can do that. Now, the bad news with the wizard is you probably have the worst class feats in the entire game. I'm sorry, wizard. I really like your class core. Class chassis is great. Arcane school, awesome. Arcane thesis, awesome. Drain bonded item, awesome. Your class feats, they're stinkers. Let's be blunt here. And you might take very close to 0 class feats on a wizard. They are an exceptional archetype user. Let's frame it that way. That's how this will go down in history. So if you are in a free archetype game, you might end up with 2 different archetypes, or you might end up going really, really hard into your archetype. And something for wizards to be aware of, even if you are going to stay a real wizard and take wizard class feats, you still might want to do something like grab a psychic dedication to get an extra focus point, especially if you like the focus spell that you get from your arcane school. I think wizards normally can only get like 2 focus points from within their own class. It's a little awkward, and I wish the wizard had gotten a tiny bit more love in terms of the remaster. Still like the class. I think the class is wildly successful despite the class feats being bad. I would not be disappointed to play a wizard in this system. Although again, I would have my eye on archetypes. Alright, some closing thoughts here. First up, I hope talking through the strengths and weaknesses of these classes made it clear that even if you are the same spell list as another class, you are going to end up having rather different characters. Even if you share like one of, being a spontaneous versus prepared caster, or a key ability score, or a spell list, you're still going to be creating these distinct characters. And I think most of the spellcasting classes that I talked about today have a real identity that does make them feel unique. Even the Druid that I don't like still gets shield block, and that's something your other casters aren't getting. And if you don't quite like what you are looking at for your class specifically, class archetypes exist. So if you don't like the idea of being a prepared caster, flexible spell preparation solves that. You wish you had more blasting options, the Elementalist fixes that. If you want more randomness and more crazy stuff, well, Wellspring magic exists. And wizards, you have the very powerful and new Runelord dedication that you can be looking at. So there is some degree of customization that is possible for each one of these classes. Now, I'm going to say that I have left out a class, and I'm not referring to the Alchemist here that I'm hoping you have forgotten about because it didn't make it into either one of these videos. We have a Spellcaster that is currently in playtest. We have the Runesmith, which is kind of a spellcaster that's not actually using a spellcaster tradition. And I am in love with this class. I started playing around with it recently, and I realized there's not very much content for it. So I'm going to change that, and we're going to look at what might be one of the highest damage output classes in the game. I still have to run my numbers on it, but my hunch is this class is cracked, and I'll see you for a discussion of it next Friday. If you made it this far in the video and you're not subscribed to my channel yet, please consider doing so. It'll help me out a lot, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day. See ya!